You've been deceived about the fundamental nature of your own consciousness. While you search for the divine through religious authorities and established institutions, secret initiatic societies have guarded for millennia the knowledge that you carry a spark of divine substance imprisoned in your body. Helena Blavatsky documented in The Secret Doctrine how the Tibetan Mahatmas master telepathy and clairvoyance through specific techniques that redirect sexual energy to awaken dormant centers of perception. You possess the same 7 vehicles of consciousness, the same energetic circuits mapped by the 10 Sephiroth, and the same potential access to the Akashic records where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Your brain doesn't produce consciousness, it only tunes into a tiny fraction of it. All minds swim in the same mental ocean, separated by illusory membranes that Gnostic practices dissolve. You're living with your capabilities switched off while believing that this is normal. The knowledge to activate them exists, preserved in secret societies that carefully choose to whom they reveal it.
There exists a knowledge that has remained hidden for millennia, transmitted only through initiatic societies and mystery schools, not by chance, but by necessity. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, in her book The Secret Doctrine, establishes that certain truths about the nature of reality were deliberately preserved far from the reach of the masses. The reason, the premature awakening of certain human faculties without proper moral and spiritual preparation would generate catastrophic consequences for both the individual and the collective. History records fragments of this wisdom. The Egyptian hierophants knew the secrets of consciousness manipulation. The initiates of Eleusis experienced expanded states of perception that dissolved the boundaries between life and death. The Tibetan masters mastered techniques for accessing the Akashic records, that cosmic memory where every thought, word, and action remains eternally recorded. Blavatsky had direct access to these teachings through the Mahatmas of the East, beings who had transcended the ordinary limitations of human consciousness. You carry within yourself all the capacities necessary to access these same planes of consciousness. The divine spark, what the Gnostics called pneuma, and the Vedantists call Atman, pulses in every human being, awaiting only the adequate conditions to manifest its complete potential. This reality contradicts everything that the power structures have taught for centuries. The organized religious institutions have spent millennia building doctrinal walls around this fundamental truth. They created hierarchies, complex rituals, and systems of intermediation that convince millions that access to the divine requires external authorization. Meanwhile, the esoteric currents within these same religions, Kabbalah in Judaism, Gnosticism in Christianity, and Sufism in Islam, preserved precise methodologies for direct contact with higher dimensions of consciousness. There exists a primordial source, the unknowable absolute from which all manifest universes emanate. This source operates through immutable laws that govern both the macrocosm and the human microcosm. Understanding these laws means acquiring power over the fundamental processes of existence: transmutation of matter, telepathic communication, clairvoyant perception, and conscious astral projection. Everything you've learned about the limits of human consciousness constitutes an elaborate control structure, maintained by those who prefer to govern over sleeping minds. The guardians of this occult knowledge know, when a human being awakens to their true divine potential, they become impossible to control through traditional mechanisms of power, fear, guilt, and ignorance. It's exactly this awakening that esoteric traditions have always offered to those courageous enough to seek it. The great spiritual traditions of humanity operate through a dual architecture. The outer teaching reaches millions through temples, sacred texts, and public rituals. The inner teaching preserves methodologies of consciousness, transformation transmitted in restricted circles of initiates. Helena Blavatsky establishes in The Secret Doctrine that this duality reflects fundamental laws governing the propagation of spiritual knowledge through the ages. The outer teaching provides moral structure, a sense of community, and devotional practices. The inner teaching offers consciousness technology, precise methods for expanding perception and accessing higher dimensions of reality. Kabbalah exemplifies this structure within Judaism. While conventional religious practice focuses on obedience to commandments and established liturgies, Kabbalah maps the internal architecture of human consciousness. The 10 Sephiroth describe levels of perception that operate simultaneously in each person, from kingdom, our dense physical reality, to crown, the point of contact with the infinite. Each Sephira functions as a consciousness portal. Through specific practices involving permutations of Hebrew letters, geometric visualizations, and breathing patterns, the Kabbalist learns to consciously navigate between these levels. What seems like philosophical abstraction reveals itself as a precise cartography of internal states, accessible through systematic methodology. Christianity presents a similar division. The canonical Gospels establish Jesus as a necessary mediator between humanity and divinity. The Gnostic texts preserve a different teaching. The Christ represents a state of consciousness achievable by any person through gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of one's own divine nature. The Gospel of Thomas locates the kingdom of heaven not in a posthumous dimension, but in present consciousness, accessible through specific practices of introspection. The Gospel of Philip describes initiatic rituals, including the bridal chamber, a ceremony where the practitioner realizes mystical union with their inner divine aspect. The Gnostics developed precise methodologies, fasts calculated to alter brain chemistry, recitation of words of power at specific frequencies, and contemplations that progressively dissolve identification with the separate ego. Each technique is calibrated through centuries of experimentation to produce specific states of perceptive expansion. In Islam, Sufism preserves similar technologies. While Orthodox practice emphasizes submission to Allah as a transcendent entity, the Sufis seek fana, complete dissolution of the boundaries between worshipper and divinity. The dervishes whirl in mathematically calculated patterns, inducing states where individual consciousness temporarily fuses with universal consciousness. Ibn Arabi documents the maqamat, precise stations through which consciousness ascends from identification with the physical body to perception of fundamental unity. Each station requires specific practices. Each one builds upon the previous, forming a methodological ladder to transcendence. Blavatsky demonstrates that mystical knowledge possesses a unique operational nature. Just as the taste of honey cannot be transmitted through words to someone who has never tasted sweetness, expanded states of consciousness must be directly experienced. Language can point directions and provide technical instructions, but realization happens beyond the verbal domain. Esoteric traditions function as consciousness laboratories. Generations of practitioners refine techniques through empirical observation of results. Specific combinations of breathing, sound, visualization, and body posture produce consistent and reproducible alterations in perception. Each element of the practice serves a specific function in the process of consciousness expansion. Proper preparation determines whether these practices produce illumination or disorientation. The development of emotional stability, mental clarity, and willpower constitutes essential prerequisites. Without this foundation, experiences of ego dissolution or multidimensional perception can overload the unprepared nervous system. The current historical moment witnesses unprecedented convergence. Previously, secret texts become publicly accessible. Practices kept secret for centuries are documented and studied. The millennial division between outer and inner teaching begins to dissolve. Blavatsky anticipated in The Secret Doctrine that humanity would reach an evolutionary stage at which the integration of these two currents would be possible and necessary. The growing global interest in contemplative practices, altered states of consciousness, and psychic phenomena signals this collective maturation. Every human being carries the necessary circuits for direct experience of the sacred. The divine spark, a fragment of infinite consciousness, exists in a latent state, awaiting activation through appropriate practices. The mystical traditions have always preserved the keys to this awakening. The outer path provides cultural context and social structure for spiritual seeking. The inner path offers methodology for direct transcendence. Both converge at the same point: experiential recognition of the divine nature inherent in every conscious being. The central question remains: will we continue to be satisfied with descriptions and symbols of the sacred, or will we seek methods that allow for direct experience? The tools have always existed, preserved in the esoteric currents of each tradition. Access to them expands progressively in this era of the revelation of occult knowledge. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky arrived in New York in 1873, bringing with her knowledge that challenged the entire structure of Western thought. Her training had occurred in Tibetan monasteries under the guidance of Mahatmas, beings who had transcended the ordinary limitations of human consciousness through millennial esoteric disciplines. In The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, she synthesized these teachings into a cosmology that dissolves the conventional boundaries between mind and matter, individual and cosmos, human and divine. The central concept that Blavatsky introduces is revolutionary in its simplicity. Consciousness is not confined to the physical brain. What we call I constitutes only the visible tip of a much vaster structure that extends through multiple dimensions of reality. She calls this the sevenfold constitution of man, 7 principles or vehicles through which consciousness operates simultaneously. From the dense physical body to Atma, the indestructible divine spark. The higher self that Blavatsky describes is not a poetic metaphor or abstract philosophical concept. It's an operational reality, a portion of individual consciousness that exists permanently in higher dimensions, connected but not limited by the physical brain. While the earthly personality is born, ages, and dies, this higher self accumulates experiences from multiple incarnations, distilling wisdom through successive cycles of manifestation. The implication of this completely destroys the materialist model of consciousness. If part of you exists in other dimensions, then phenomena like telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition become not just possible, but expected. Blavatsky explains that all human beings are connected in the subtle planes through what she calls universal mental substance, an ocean of consciousness in which each individual mind is like a wave, apparently separate, but fundamentally one with the whole. The altered states of consciousness that Blavatsky studied and practiced reveal these normally invisible connections. Through specific meditation techniques taught by the Mahatmas, she developed the capacity to access what she called astral light, an etheric record where every thought, emotion, and action leaves a permanent impression. In this dimension, past, present, and future coexist simultaneously, accessible to those who have developed the appropriate organs of perception. The Theosophical Society, founded by Blavatsky in 1875, became a laboratory for systematic experimentation with these expanded states. members reported experiences of shared consciousness during group meditation sessions, moments where individual mental barriers dissolved and a unitary perception emerged. Some developed the capacity for thought reading, others for remote viewing. Blavatsky insisted that these were not supernatural faculties, but latent capacities in every human being, awaiting only proper training for manifestation. The method she proposed for dissolving mental barriers involved 3 fundamental aspects. First, intellectual study of the occult laws that govern consciousness, understanding theoretically how the multidimensional structure of reality functions. Second, regular practice of meditation and concentration to develop control over the subtle vehicles. Third, and most important, moral and emotional purification, for Blavatsky taught that uncontrolled vices and passions create turbulences in the mental field that prevent clear perception of the higher planes. The key to accessing the higher self, according to Blavatsky, lies in what she calls paralyzation of the lower self. During deep states of meditation, when mental chatter ceases and identifications with body and personality temporarily dissolve, a window opens through which higher consciousness can manifest. In these moments, profound insights emerge spontaneously, solutions to complex problems appear completely formed, and experiences of cosmic unity dissolve the illusion of separation. Blavatsky carefully distinguishes between passive mediumship and active occult development. The common medium becomes a passive receptacle for external influences, losing control over its faculties. The trained occultist, on the contrary, develops mastery over their subtle vehicles, consciously navigating between different planes of existence while maintaining lucidity and discernment. This distinction is crucial. It's not about opening oneself indiscriminately to the invisible, but about developing precise instruments of perception and control. The dissolution of mental barriers reveals what Blavatsky considers the great illusion of common human existence, the sensation of isolation and separation. In The Secret Doctrine, she demonstrates that this perception of being mentally isolated from one another constitutes a temporary limitation of incarnated consciousness, not our natural condition. In the higher planes, minds interpenetrate, thoughts circulate freely, and communication happens instantaneously without need for words or external signs. Blavatsky's work established foundations that would influence all subsequent development of Western esoteric thought. She provided a detailed map of the territories of expanded consciousness, practical instructions for navigation in these domains, and most importantly, the affirmation that these capacities are not the privilege of a chosen few, but the evolutionary heritage of all humanity. The question is not whether we possess these faculties, but when and how we choose to develop them. For the Gnostics, to truly know something means to become one with that something. Knowledge and transformation are inseparable processes. When a Gnostic initiate affirms knowing God, they're not saying they possess information about the divine, but rather that they've realized an ontological fusion in which their individual consciousness temporarily dissolves into universal consciousness. Helena Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, confirms this principle by establishing that true occult knowledge can only be acquired when the student becomes that which they study. The most radical Gnostic concept establishes that every human being carries a literal divine spark imprisoned within the physical body. This spark, the pneuma of the Gnostics, is a real fragment of divine substance, not an inferior creation or emanation. You are, in your deepest essence, a piece of God that has forgotten its nature. The material world functions as an elaborate prison, specifically designed to keep this spark asleep and ignorant of its true power. Blavatsky validates this Gnostic cosmology by describing in The Secret Doctrine how the monads, indestructible units of divine consciousness, descend through the planes of existence and become progressively more entangled in matter. What the Gnostics called the fall of Sophia corresponds to what Blavatsky calls the great sacrifice, the voluntary plunge of spirit into matter to acquire self-consciousness through experience. The Gnostic practices of celibacy and chastity reveal a profound understanding of inner alchemy. The same energy that the body uses to create physical life can be redirected to awaken dormant capacities of spiritual perception. The Gnostics discovered that seminal fluid contains not just reproductive potential, but a vital essence that, when conserved and transmuted, feeds the higher centers of consciousness. Blavatsky confirms this discovery by explaining that the sacred fire mentioned in all esoteric traditions is literally the sexual force elevated and refined through specific practices. The Gospel of Philip declares, "He who does not transform the fire of lust into the light of gnosis will remain a slave of matter." This is not religious moralism, but precise technical instruction. Each orgasm dissipates a specific amount of ojas energy, the etheric fluid that feeds the higher faculties. The Gnostics who practiced prolonged retention reported experiences of spontaneous illumination, visions of other dimensions, and the capacity to perceive the inner light in other beings. The material world, according to Gnostic cosmology, was created by the demiurge, an ignorant entity that believes itself to be the supreme god. Blavatsky identifies this demiurge with what Eastern philosophy calls Maya, the great illusion. It's not a malevolent entity, but a cosmic principle of limitation necessary for individualized experience to be possible. The problem arises when beings identify completely with this illusory reality and forget their transcendent nature. True Gnostic knowledge cannot be transmitted through words or scriptures. It happens as a transformative event in the very being of the initiate. When Valentinus taught his disciples in Alexandria, he wasn't passing on information, but catalyzing internal processes of awakening. Through specific combinations of fasting, vigil, contemplation, and recitation of words of power, the practitioner's subtle vehicles were progressively refined until direct perception of spiritual reality became possible. Blavatsky explains in The Secret Doctrine that there are 7 keys to interpreting all sacred texts, and that Gnosticism especially preserved the psychological and physiological keys. Each mythical narrative simultaneously describes cosmic processes and transformations that occur within the practitioner themselves. The fall of Sophia is not just a cosmological event, but a drama that repeats in every soul that awakens to its imprisoned condition. The archons, governors of the planetary spheres in Gnostic cosmology, represent psychic forces that keep human consciousness imprisoned in material appetites and illusions. Each archon governs a specific passion: anger, lust, envy, fear, pride, greed, and sloth. To ascend through the spheres and return to the pleroma, the Gnostic must conquer each of these forces, not through suppression, but through conscious transmutation. Simon Magus publicly demonstrated the powers acquired through gnosis, levitation, materialization, and clairvoyance. Blavatsky explains that these phenomena result naturally when the higher principles of man are awakened and integrated. What seems like a miracle to common consciousness is simply the operation of higher natural laws accessible to those who have completed the Gnostic transformation. The final goal of the Gnostic path, the reintegration of the spark with the divine pleroma, doesn't mean extinction of individuality, but its infinite expansion. The realized Gnostic maintains their unique identity while consciously participating in divine totality. They become, in Blavatsky's words, a self-conscious center in the ocean of universal consciousness. Gnostic knowledge is, therefore, something you become, not something you possess. Telepathy and clairvoyance prove that our consciousness functions in dimensions that materialist science still cannot measure. When someone shares thoughts without words or perceives events in distant locations, they're demonstrating that consciousness is not limited to the physical brain. Helena Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, establishes that the brain functions only as an instrument of reception and transmission for a consciousness that exists in more subtle planes of reality. Blavatsky describes in her work how all individual minds exist within an ocean of universal consciousness. She calls this primordial mental substance, or akasha, the subtle ether through which thoughts and emotions propagate like waves. Each apparently separate mind is in reality a temporary vortex in this consciousness ocean, maintaining individuality while remaining fundamentally connected to the whole. According to The Secret Doctrine, primitive humanity possessed these telepathic faculties as a natural condition. In the early evolutionary stages, before the full development of articulated speech, communication occurred through the direct transfer of mental images and emotional impressions. The development of analytical intellect and verbal language, while representing progress in certain aspects, resulted in the progressive dormancy of these more subtle capacities. Clairvoyance reveals something even more fundamental. Linear time constitutes only the limited mode in which we process a reality that exists simultaneously in all its temporal expressions. Blavatsky explains that in the plane of the eternal present, past, present, and future coexist as an indivisible whole. The developed clairvoyant manages to elevate their consciousness to this atemporal plane and observe events that, for common perception, haven't happened yet, or have already passed. The Akashic records described in The Secret Doctrine represent this cosmic memory where every thought, emotion, and action leaves permanent impressions. Blavatsky explains that the astral light functions as a universal photosensitive substance that automatically preserves images of all events. The trained clairvoyant learns to tune their perception with these Akashic impressions, reading them like someone examining photographs in an infinite cosmic library. The sevenfold constitution of the human being, as Blavatsky details, explains the mechanism of these phenomena. The mental body, one of the subtle vehicles that interpenetrate the physical body, serves as the natural organ of telepathy. When two mental bodies vibrate at harmonic frequencies, thought transfer occurs instantaneously, independent of physical distance. The Buddhic principle, even more subtle, completely transcends spatio-temporal limitations and allows true clairvoyance. Blavatsky insists that these phenomena operate according to precise natural laws, only at levels of reality that current scientific instruments don't reach. Just as X-rays always existed but were only discovered when we developed means to detect them, the subtle dimensions of consciousness await future scientific recognition. What seems supernatural is simply the natural operating beyond the limits of ordinary perception. The sensation of mental isolation that we consider normal constitutes, according to The Secret Doctrine, a temporary anomaly in human development. During the process of individualization, necessary for the development of self-consciousness, humanity plunged deeply into matter and temporarily lost perception of its essential unity. We live at the densest point of this plunge, where the illusion of separation reaches its maximum. The spontaneous cases of telepathy, the mother who instantly feels when her child suffers an accident, the twins who share sensations despite distance, demonstrate that mental connections remain active below the threshold of waking consciousness. Blavatsky explains that intense emotional states can temporarily break the psychic barriers that normally block these perceptions, allowing the reality of mental interconnection to manifest. In The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky establishes that human evolution follows a great arc: descent into matter for the acquisition of individualized experience, followed by conscious ascent carrying the acquired knowledge. We're currently beginning the ascending phase, and the growing interest in psychic phenomena signals the beginning of the collective reawakening of these dormant faculties. Every thought creates disturbances in the collective mental field, subtly influencing all other minds. Every emotion resonates through the universal telepathic network, contributing to what Blavatsky calls the psychic atmosphere of humanity. We are never truly alone or isolated. This is the great illusion that telepathy and clairvoyance dispel. The controlled development of these faculties represents the next evolutionary step of the human species. It's not about acquiring new powers, but awakening capacities that have always existed in a latent state. Blavatsky prophesies in The Secret Doctrine that future humanity will operate consciously with these expanded perceptions, transcending current limitations of communication and directly perceiving the fundamental unity of all life. The question is not whether this will happen, but when each individual will choose to begin this awakening. The Sephiroth of Kabbalah solve the fundamental paradox of existence. How can the absolute infinite create a finite world and continue being infinite? How can perfect unity become multiplicity without losing its unified nature? Helena Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, recognizes in Hebrew Kabbalah one of the most precise expressions of universal esoteric wisdom, a detailed map of how divine consciousness unfolds from the unknowable absolute to the dense matter we experience as physical reality. The Ein Sof, that which has no end, represents in Kabbalah the absolute infinite before any manifestation. Blavatsky identifies this concept with the unmanifested absolute of Eastern philosophies, that primordial reality that transcends all human comprehension. It cannot be described because it's beyond all qualities. It's neither light nor darkness, neither great nor small. It neither exists nor ceases to exist. It's the pure potentiality from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. For creation to be possible, this infinite needs somehow to create space for the finite to exist. Kabbalah solves this mystery through the concept of voluntary divine contraction. Imagine the infinite as unlimited light filling absolutely everything. For something besides itself to exist, it needs to retract part of its light, create a zone where its plenitude is not totally manifest. It's not that the infinite diminishes. It voluntarily veils part of itself so that limited experience can be possible. The 10 Sephiroth are the stages through which this infinite light progressively densifies until it becomes the material world. Think of them as cosmic electrical transformers. Each one reduces the divine voltage to levels that creation can bear without being instantly annihilated. The first, called Crown, is the initial point where the infinite begins to manifest. Then follow wisdom and understanding, forming the upper triad. Then come mercy and severity, establishing the rhythm of expansion and contraction. Beauty harmonizes these opposites in the center. Victory and splendor project this harmony. Foundation consolidates all forces. The kingdom is our physical world. Blavatsky explains in The Secret Doctrine that this tree-like structure, the tree of life, doesn't just map the outer cosmos, but also our internal constitution. Every human being is a complete replica of this cosmic tree. The energy centers in our subtle body, which Easterners call chakras, correspond to the Sephiroth. Our spinal column is the trunk of this inner tree, and divine energy circulates through it continuously. The most revolutionary concept of Kabbalah, every fragment of creation contains the complete pattern of the whole. Like a hologram where each piece preserves the entire image, each sephira contains all the others in different proportions. This means that you, at this moment, contain within yourself the complete structure of the universe. Not symbolically, literally. The same pattern that organizes galaxies organizes the atoms in your body. The Kabbalists describe 4 worlds or dimensions of reality that exist simultaneously. The world of pure emanation, where everything is still unity. The world of creation, where the first archetypes arise. The world of formation, where these archetypes gain structure. And finally, the world of action, our physical reality. Blavatsky demonstrates that these are not distant places but different densities of the same reality, like vapor, water, and ice, are different states of the same substance. In The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky emphasizes that Kabbalah offers practical methods for consciously navigating between these worlds. Through meditation on the Sephiroth, visualization of the paths that connect them, and work with the Hebrew letters considered sacred, the practitioner learns to elevate their consciousness through the different densities of reality, not as an escape from the physical world, but as an experiential understanding that the physical is only the outermost layer of a multidimensional reality. Our material world, according to this Kabbalistic vision that Blavatsky confirms, literally consists of divine thoughts that have condensed until they became solid. Every object around you began as a pure idea in the divine mind, gained archetypal form, developed energetic structure, and finally crystallized into matter. The chair where you sit, the words you hear, your own body, everything is divine consciousness vibrating at frequencies so low that they seem solid. Divine energy constantly descends from crown to kingdom, vivifying all creation at every instant. Simultaneously, evolutionary consciousness ascends from kingdom to crown, returning to the source with accumulated experience. This bidirectional flow is what keeps the universe in existence. If it stopped for a moment, all manifestation would instantly dissolve back into the infinite. Our physical world is only the most condensed and crystallized form of processes that begin in dimensions of pure consciousness. Everything we see and touch is a divine thought that became so dense it turned into matter, and because each part contains the whole, you have potential access to all levels of this reality. The question is not whether you can reach the infinite, you're already an expression of it. The question is, when will you recognize this? Helena Blavatsky demonstrates in The Secret Doctrine that esoteric ideas function as underground currents that shape important historical events while remaining carefully omitted from official narratives. She traces lineages of occult knowledge crossing centuries, passing from initiate to initiate, silently influencing kings, scientists, artists, and revolutionaries. These currents carry the same central knowledge. Every human being possesses direct access to the divine through specific mystical practices without need for institutional intermediation. Blavatsky reveals how Masonic symbols appear consistently at crucial moments in Western history. The French Revolution, beyond political insurrection, represented the emergence of initiatic ideas about fundamental spiritual equality among beings. In Masonic lodges, long before the fall of the Bastille, Hermetic teachings circulated about the divine spark present in every individual, a concept that directly challenged the divine right of kings. Voltaire, member of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, propagated ideas about religious tolerance derived from the esoteric recognition that all religions emanate from the same primordial source. In The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky establishes that the Renaissance resulted directly from the influx of Hermetic knowledge preserved in Byzantium. When Constantinople fell in 1453, Byzantine scholars brought manuscripts containing the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus to Florence. Cosimo de' Medici ordered Marsilio Ficino to interrupt his translation of Plato to first translate the Corpus Hermeticum, recognizing its superior importance. Hermetic ideas about man as a microcosm of the universe and the possibility of spiritual ascension through knowledge catalyzed the cultural transformation that followed. Leonardo da Vinci incorporated sacred geometry and esoteric proportions in his works, studying alchemical and anatomical texts forbidden by the Church. His flying machines and visionary projects emerged from his Hermetic understanding of correspondences between planes of existence. Michelangelo hid Kabbalistic symbols in the Sistine Chapel ceiling, transmitting initiatic knowledge through apparently orthodox images. Blavatsky documents how Isaac Newton dedicated decades to the study of alchemy and esoteric biblical chronology, leaving manuscripts where he describes matter as God's sensorium, a concept identical to what she presents about the consciousness nature of physical reality. His laws of physics emerged from his quest to understand the mechanisms through which the divine operates in the material world. The Royal Society, the scientific institution he presided over, had its origin in Rosicrucian circles dedicated to the joint study of science and occultism. The Theosophical Society, founded by Blavatsky, became itself one of these underground currents influencing history. Annie Besant, Blavatsky's successor, actively worked in India's independence movement, promoting the idea that Eastern spiritual wisdom had value equal to or greater than Western materialism. Gandhi studied theosophical texts and incorporated the concept of fundamental unity of all religions into his political philosophy. Blavatsky explains in The Secret Doctrine that these occult influences operate through what she calls collective mental impression. Esoteric ideas are released at specific moments by those who guard ancient knowledge, creating ripples in collective consciousness that gradually alter dominant thinking. A mystical concept presented symbolically in art prepares the collective mind to accept it scientifically generations later. The modernist artistic movement demonstrates this influence clearly. Kandinsky, after reading The Secret Doctrine, developed theories about the need for art to express invisible spiritual realities. Mondrian, also a theosophist, created his geometric compositions, seeking to reveal the fundamental structures of reality described by Blavatsky. Scriabin composed symphonies based on correspondences between sounds and colors derived from esoteric teachings about spiritual synesthesia. Blavatsky identifies a recurring pattern. Apparently rational and materialist movements extract energy from deep mystical impulses. The theory of evolution echoes esoteric teachings about emanation and progressive development of consciousness through forms. Deep psychology rediscovers territories mapped centuries ago by occultists under different names. Quantum physics approaches concepts about the illusory nature of matter present in millennial esoteric traditions. Why do these occult currents persist despite centuries of attempts at eradication? Blavatsky answers, because they correspond to fundamental needs of the human soul that no purely materialist system can satisfy. The yearning for transcendence, the search for meaning beyond the material, the impulse to connect with higher dimensions. These characteristics define human consciousness as much as reason or emotion. The transformative implication. Visible history constitutes only the surface of much deeper processes occurring in collective consciousness. Every scientific discovery, every social revolution, every artistic movement reflects changes happening first in the subtle planes of existence. The true architects of history operate in these invisible planes, sowing ideas that will flower in future epochs. Every change begins with understanding your role as co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We've developed a set of audio tools to help you access this state of higher consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click on the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me,"